There are moments in life that split our world into before and after. For me, that moment happened on a Sunday in May, right in the garden of the California home I had bought for my son, surrounded by relatives I had supported for years, holding a $9.99 cup of coffee while watching another woman receive gifts worth $15,000. My name is Mary. I'm 67. And this story needs to be told because maybe it will help other mothers realize when it's time to stop giving and start valuing themselves. That day was Mother's Day, and for the first time in years, my son Ethan said he was throwing a special lunch. I was thrilled. I put on my favorite navy blue dress, the one Ethan once said made me look elegant, and left home with my heart full of hope. At 67, after a lifetime of sacrifice, I thought I deserved to be appreciated, didn't I? When I arrived at the house, I had helped Ethan and his wife, Olivia, to pay for when they got married 5 years earlier. I saw the garden filled with expensive flowers, the table elegantly set for about a dozen guests. Olivia greeted me with a forced smile. Ethan gave me a quick hug, then immediately turned to Margaret, his mother-in-law, who had just arrived, dressed like the queen of the party. "Mary, I'm so glad you could make it," Olivia said, her voice polite rather than warm. She pointed me toward a chair at the far side of the table, well away from the head seat where Margaret was placed like the guest of honor. Margaret wore an emerald green dress, sparkling jewelry glittering in the afternoon sun. Her hair was perfectly styled, clearly fresh from an upscale salon. She smiled sweetly, her tone laced with subtle mockery. "Hello, Mary. That dress of yours is quite interesting." I caught the hidden jab instantly. Ethan looked busy and excited, rushing around to make sure everything was perfect. "Mom, have a seat, we're about to start," he said without looking at me once. All his attention was on Margaret. "Are you comfortable? Do you need anything? Do you like the food?" Ah, I sat there, my heart aching. How long had it been since he cared for me like that? How long since he'd looked at me with tenderness? Throughout the meal, Margaret was the center of attention. She talked about raising Olivia alone after her husband passed, as if she were the only woman who'd ever known hardship. I had raised Ethan alone too, but no one mentioned that. Every time I spoke, the conversation shifted elsewhere. "Margaret is such an example of strength and grace," Ethan said. With the admiration I had longed to hear for years, Olivia chimed in. "My mom has always been the hero of our family. Everything we have today is thanks to her." Those words cut deep. I had been a hero too. I had sacrificed everything for Ethan, and yet no one remembered. When dessert time came, Ethan stood, tapped his spoon against his glass, and smiled. "Everyone, this is the most important moment of the day." My heart raced. Finally, I thought. Finally, my son wants to honor me all those years of hard work, sleepless nights, and unconditional love. Ethan walked over to Margaret, holding a red velvet box. I recognized it instantly, a luxury jewelry brand. "Margaret," he said, kneeling beside her chair, "you are an extraordinary woman. You raised the woman I love, and for that, I'll always be grateful." He opened the box. Inside was a diamond ring that sparkled like a tiny star. "This ring is a symbol of my gratitude and affection for you." Then he pulled out 2 envelopes tickets for a Caribbean cruise. "You deserve to rest and enjoy life." Margaret burst into tears, her face glowing with emotion. "Oh, sweetheart, you didn't have to." "I did," Ethan interrupted, kissing her hand where the diamond gleamed in the light. "You deserve all of this. You're like a second mother to me." Applause filled the garden. Olivia cried with pride. The guests sighed in admiration. And I sat frozen, watching my son pour out his love for another woman and spend over $15,000 on her. I did the math quickly. The ring cost at least $10,000, and the cruise around $5,000. A total of $15,000 for a woman who had never contributed a single cent to the family, living off government benefits and her daughter's gifts. Then Ethan stood up and looked my way. "Now, let's honor my mother too," he said, walking toward me. But this time, there was no red velvet box, no envelope, nothing, only a cheap porcelain mug, clearly bought in a rush, with a faded flower painted on the side. "Mom," Ethan said, handing it to me with a strained smile. "I know you love tea. I hope you'll like this gift." Along with the mug, he gave me a small folded note. "Happy Mother's Day." I held the mug with trembling hands. It was light, cheap, the kind of thing you'd grab at a supermarket for a few dollars. I opened the note. "Thank you for everything. You're a wonderful mom. Happy Mother's Day. Sincerely, Ethan." No, love you. Just sincerely, as if I were some distant acquaintance, not the woman who had given her entire life for him. The room fell silent. Everyone noticed the painful contrast between the two gifts. Margaret kept admiring the diamond ring on her hand, while I held a cheap mug. A few people looked at me with pity, others with discomfort. "How sweet," one relative said awkwardly, trying to ease the tension. "A mug is always useful." Useful. That word summed up exactly how they saw me. Useful. Not loved. Not appreciated. Not respected. Just useful. Ethan turned again to Margaret, who was raising her hand to show off the diamond ring. "Look how it sparkles," she said proudly. "I've never received anything this beautiful in my life." And I sat there, still, clutching the mug, feeling like someone had punched me in the stomach, not because of the money, but because I felt erased. 45 years of sacrifice reduced to a $9.99 gift. I remembered the nights I worked late to pay his tuition, the day I sold my mother's wedding ring, the only thing she'd left me to buy Ethan's college books. The years I worked 2 jobs so he could study in Europe, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, he had said. And when he got married, how many times did I help? How many times did I pay off his debts, fund his failed business ventures? How many times did I quietly drain my savings to cover his mistakes? All forgotten. Meanwhile, Margaret, who had never worked to raise her child, never lost sleep over bills, never gave up her dreams for her daughter, was gifted jewelry and a luxury vacation. And I, the woman who had built a business from nothing, giving my son a solid future, received a cheap mug. "What's wrong, Mom? Why are you so quiet?" Ethan finally noticed my expression. "Don't you like the gift?" I looked at the son I had raised, protected, and sacrificed everything for. And now he was asking if I liked a $10 mug. How could I explain that the problem wasn't the gift itself, but what it meant? How could I tell him that, in front of everyone, he had just declared I was worth 1/1500th of his mother-in-law? "It's beautiful." I forced a smile. "Thank you." But something inside me shattered for good. As I held the cheap mug and watched Margaret flaunt her diamond ring, I realized a painful truth. I had become invisible in my own son's life. Worse, I was no longer a source of love, only a source of money. The lunch went on, but my mind was elsewhere. I wondered, when did I become unnecessary? When did my worth start being measured in dollars? When it was time to leave, Ethan gave me a quick hug. "Thanks for coming, Mom. Let's talk later." It wasn't a Mother's Day hug. It was a polite gesture. I drove home, the mug on the seat beside me, like a ticking time bomb. When I arrived, I sat in my living room, the room I had lovingly decorated, and stared at that mug for hours. I knew my life had reached a turning point. I couldn't keep living like a shadow, only remembered when someone found me useful. At 67, I needed to find myself again, the woman who existed beyond the title, Ethan's mother. It was time to change everything. Old memories flooded back, memories I had buried under years of work, sacrifice, and the desperate hope of being appreciated. It all began when Ethan was 8 years old. I remember clearly that September morning in 1989 when I woke up and found only a note on the kitchen table. Mary, I can't keep doing this. I need to live my own life. Please take care of our boy. Robert. Robert, my husband of 10 years, Ethan's father, had disappeared in the night. He took his clothes, his papers, and left behind an 8-year-old boy and a 31-year-old woman who had no idea how to raise a child alone. At that time, I worked part-time in a small sewing factory, earning barely enough to help with the household bills. Now, that was our only source of income, and it wasn't enough to make it through the month. Ethan cried for weeks, always asking, "When's Dad coming back, Mom?" That question broke my heart, but all I could do was hold him and say, "I don't know, sweetheart, but I'll always be here, and I'll never leave you." In the first few months after Robert left, Ethan and I almost lost our home. He had left behind stacks of unpaid bills, and I didn't even know where to begin. I still remember one night Ethan was asleep, and I sat in the kitchen, going over numbers scribbled on scraps of paper. No matter how I calculated, the money never added up. That night, I made a decision that would change my life forever. I took out my old sewing machine and started taking work from home, anything I could get. Hemming pants, mending rips. I worked until 3 a.m. Then, at 6 a.m., I got up again to get Ethan ready for school before heading to the factory for the morning shift. "Mom, aren't you going to sleep?" he asked, seeing my tired eyes. "I do sleep, honey. I'm just working a little more so we can have a better life." But the truth was, I barely slept at all. For years, I slept only 3 or 4 hours a night. The home sewing jobs slowly grew. One client told another, and before long, I had more work than I could handle. That's when I realized this might be a real opportunity. When Ethan turned 14, in 1995, I had saved enough money to rent a small storefront. I opened my first shop and called it Mary's Atelier, a tiny space on the outskirts of Dallas, with just 2 sewing machines and a cutting table. But it was the first thing I had ever built for myself. "Mom, are you really going to have your own store?" Ethan asked, his eyes shining. "Yes, sweetheart. So you'll never have to go without, so you can study at a good school and have everything I never did." In the early years, I worked alone, keeping the shop open from 7 a.m. until 10 p.m. Ethan often sat in a small corner doing his homework, growing up surrounded by fabric and thread, always with a book in hand. "I'll be your partner." Those words filled me with pride and hope. I worked not just for the present, but for the future we were building together. By 1998, the small shop had become a pleasant, mini workshop. I hired 3 seamstresses and started producing clothes for local stores. The business kept growing, but my life was still full of stress. Every night, I came home around 11 p.m., exhausted, but still managed a smile as I asked, "How was school today, sweetheart? Need help with anything?" No matter how tired I was, Ethan was always my first priority. When the time came to choose a college, I asked, "What do you want to study?" "Business management, Mom. I want to learn how to run a company so I can help you expand yours." My heart nearly burst with joy. Finally, all my sacrifices meant something. Tuition was about $1,200 a month, a huge amount for someone who once earned $40 per custom order. But I didn't hesitate. I took more orders, hired extra help, worked day and night. The business grew with me. During the 4 years Ethan was in college, I became a true businesswoman. Mary's fashion studio had 15 employees and supplied clothing to many boutiques across Texas. I taught myself management, marketing, and finance all through experience, with one single goal: to build a solid foundation for my son. "Mom, you're incredible," Ethan often said when he visited the company. "Just look at everything you've built. It's amazing." He looked at me with pride, and in that moment, every sacrifice felt worth it. When Ethan graduated, I immediately brought him into the company, not as an employee, but as a partner. I split the ownership 50-50. "Now we're real co-owners," I said as I signed the papers. "Everything I've built is yours too." In the early years, everything was wonderful. Ethan was full of energy and new ideas. We worked side by side, made decisions together, and dreamed of the company's future. She worked for a major media corporation, made a great salary, and carried the confidence of someone who had never known struggle. From the very first dinner Ethan brought her home, I sensed something had changed. "So you're the famous Mary?" Olivia said, shaking my hand with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Ethan's told me a lot about the company. It must be exhausting working day and night like that." That word exhausting bothered me. To me, it wasn't exhaustion. It was passion, purpose, the reason I existed. But to her, it was just a burden. In the months that followed, I noticed Ethan starting to change. "Mom, don't you think you're overworking yourself?" he said one day. "Olivia says you should learn to relax, to slow down." That sentence soon became a familiar refrain. Olivia's opinions slowly began replacing my son's own thinking. When they got married, I hoped things would improve. Olivia moved to Dallas, and I thought we might become closer. But she brought someone with her, Margaret, her mother. Margaret was 55, widowed at 45, living on her pension. She had never worked hard labor a day in her life, never worried about paying bills at the end of the month. But Margaret had something I didn't: plenty of free time, and no expectations of Ethan. "Mom, Margaret's such a wise woman," Ethan often said. "She always gives such balanced advice." "Balanced advice?" I laughed bitterly. When I offered advice based on 25 years of business experience, I was called controlling or old-fashioned. But Margaret quoting afternoon talk shows was considered wise. The first major change came when Ethan decided to modernize the company. He invested in expensive equipment, hired more employees, expanded production without a single market study, relying only on his business instinct. "Mom, you've got to trust my vision," he said when I questioned the spending. Olivia says, "You're too rigid, afraid of change." And the result? A disaster. The market didn't grow as expected. The warehouses were full of unsold products. The payroll was bloated. I had to pull out $200,000 of my own savings to save the company from bankruptcy. "Thanks, Mom," Ethan said as I signed the check. "You always rescue me." But his voice carried no gratitude, only expectation, as if cleaning up his mess was simply my duty. Then, in 2019, Ethan decided to open a restaurant in Austin, calling it Diversifying the Business. Once again, no research, no experience, just the blind confidence of someone who had never truly failed. "Margaret says it's a great idea," Ethan told me. "She thinks I have a natural talent for business." Margaret, a woman who couldn't even manage a small kiosk, had somehow become his business advisor. The restaurant lasted 8 months, and I lost $180,000 covering the losses. This time, Ethan didn't even bother to say thank you. "That's just how business goes, Mom," he said, as if failure were fate, not the consequence of reckless decisions. But the worst was still to come. In 2021, Ethan joined a high-profit investment project with a few friends. I warned him, but he still poured in $300,000 of his own money and $100,000 from the company. By the time he discovered it was a financial scam, it was too late. "Mom, I need your help," he said, crying in my office. "If you don't loan me the money, we'll lose everything." Loan? That word broke my heart, because for him, loan meant gift. He had never repaid a single dollar in all those years. I had to withdraw another $300,000, but this time, I set a condition. "This is the last mistake I'll cover for you. From now on, every major company decision goes through me." He nodded, but I knew it was only out of desperation. Through all those years, Margaret remained the perfect mother-in-law. She never criticized Ethan, never asked for explanations, never demanded accountability. When he lost money, she simply said, "It's okay, son. That's normal in business." But whenever I spoke up, she would whisper to Olivia, "Your mother-in-law is too controlling." Olivia had a special talent for spending the money I poured into the company. "Ethan, we need new furniture." "Ethan, my mom needs special medical care." "Ethan, I saw a gorgeous SUV perfect for our family." And Ethan, always eager to please his wife, constantly found ways to withdraw company funds to indulge her wishes. "It's just a temporary loan, Mom. Once things get better, I'll pay it back." But things never got better. The company stalled, surviving only on old contracts I had secured years before. No growth, no innovation. Ethan was no longer a businessman, just a spender, a failure manager. As for me, I still arrived first, left last, solved every problem, made every critical decision. But who got the credit? Ethan. Who was called the successful entrepreneur? Ethan. Who did Margaret praise as a man who really knows business? Still, Ethan. I had become invisible in the very company I founded. Worse yet, I was invisible in the life of the son I had raised. He only saw me when he needed money, only came to me when things went wrong, only respected me when I signed a check. And that's how I arrived at that Mother's Day, at 67 years old, holding a $9.99 coffee mug, and finally understanding that I was nothing more than a walking ATM in my son and daughter-in-law's lives. 35 years of sacrifice, work, and devotion. 35 years building an empire for a son who now saw his mother as nothing more than a wallet with legs. I, once a mother, a businesswoman, a provider, was left with only a cheap mug and a hastily written note. No more unconditional giving. It was time to be seen, to be valued, to be respected. And if not, then at least it was time to say no. The Monday morning after that Mother's Day, I woke up feeling different. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel the weight of responsibility on my shoulders. Instead, I felt a cold clarity, as if the veil that had covered my eyes for years had finally fallen. I got up at 6 a.m., made myself coffee, and looked at that $9.99 mug on the kitchen table. It was no longer a gift, it was a silent alarm clock, reminding me that it was time to change. That morning, instead of going to the office as usual to fix the same problems, I did something I hadn't done in years. I sat at my desk at home and looked back at my life. Not at the numbers or the ledgers, but at the memories. Memories I had buried because they were too painful to face. I remembered when Ethan was 25, calling me in despair after losing all the money I had given him to start his business. "Mom, I need your help," he cried over the phone. "I can't do anything without you." Back then, those words made me proud. They made me feel important, irreplaceable. But now, as those same words echoed in my mind, they carried the bitter taste of truth. Ethan had never learned to stand on his own without me. When did "Mom, I need your help" turn into "Mom, I need your money"? When did I stop being a mother and become a walking bank account. I took out an old shoebox where I kept family photos. There was one of Ethan at 30, on his graduation day in California, earning his degree in business management. In the photo, he looked at me with pride. "Mom, you're my hero," he had said. "Everything I've achieved is because of you." I flipped through more photos and found one from his wedding to Olivia. I was standing beside them, smiling with joy, never realizing that picture marked the beginning of my invisibility. I remembered one afternoon, about 2 years after the wedding, I went to their house to drop off some documents and accidentally overheard a conversation in the kitchen. "Your mom worries too much," Olivia said. "You should trust yourself more." "My mom never interferes in my life." And Ethan replied, "You're right. My mom is always so tense. Margaret's much more relaxed." From that moment on, Ethan's phone calls began to change. Before, he used to call just to talk about his day, to share his joys or his worries. But ever since Margaret, Olivia's mother, entered his life, the calls had become short and cold. "Hi, Mom. How are you? I need to talk to you about something." And there was always something: a problem to fix, a crisis to cover up, an investment opportunity that needed funding. And I, foolish as ever, always helped, always saved him, always paid. There had been so many times I felt hurt, so many times I felt unnecessary, invisible, but I always told myself, they're just busy. Newlyweds are like that. Things will get better. Until 3 months before that Mother's Day, Ethan called, asking for money urgently, said Olivia needed emergency medical care. Worried, I transferred the money immediately. The next day, I found out that the emergency had been a cosmetic surgery. When I confronted him, he said, "Mom, Olivia's had deep insecurities for years. This is about her mental health." Mental health? I was financing plastic surgery under the name of therapy? That Monday morning, sitting alone at my table, I realized the truth. I hadn't just raised a son, I had raised an addict to escaping responsibility, an addict to being rescued by his mother, an addict to fixing every mistake with my money. And I was the one supplying the drug. Every time I saved him, every time I paid off a debt, I was teaching him that he didn't need to grow up, because Mom would always clean up the mess. I stood up, walked to the bathroom, and looked at myself in the mirror. A 67-year-old woman stared back at me, exhausted, hollow, and lost after decades of being only Mom. I saw a woman who had spent her life giving, carrying, enduring so much that she had forgotten how to live for herself. "Mary," I said to my reflection, "you've spent your whole life building an empire for a son who no longer even sees you. You've tried to be the perfect mother for someone who doesn't appreciate it. You've given everything, and all you got in return were scraps of affection." At that very moment, I made a decision that would change my life forever. This wasn't about money, or the company, or even inheritance. It was about dignity, about reclaiming my own worth, about no longer letting myself disappear in my own life. I picked up the phone and called my lawyer, Mr. Harris. "Dr. Harris, I need to see you right away. I want to make some changes in my life." "Of course, Mrs. Mary." "What kind of changes?" "The kind that will give me my dignity back." By 9 a.m. Tuesday morning, I was at his office. He was a serious, trustworthy man who knew the full structure of my assets. When I told him about my decision, he looked at me over his glasses, clearly concerned. "Mrs. Mary, are you sure?" "Selling the company is a bold move," I replied. "I've never been more certain. Prepare the paperwork. I want to sell everything quickly and cleanly." He sighed and began taking notes. "I'll have the documents ready in a few days, but you should inform Ethan first." "I don't need to inform him. He'll find out soon enough." I left the lawyer's office feeling strange, as if I'd just jumped off a cliff without knowing where I'd land. But I knew one thing for sure. Wherever I landed, it would be better than where I was standing. On Wednesday morning, I went to the bank downtown, not to borrow money, not to fix anyone's problems, but to take care of myself. I transferred all the funds from the joint accounts into one that only I could access. I canceled every supplementary credit card I had given to Ethan and Olivia. Marlene, the bank manager who'd known me for over 20 years, looked at me in surprise. Mary, what's going on? These are major changes. I'm fine, Marlene. In fact, this is the first time I've really been fine in years. By Thursday, Ethan still had no idea. I was at home sorting through personal documents when the phone rang. Mom, Olivia's card got declined at the grocery store. Can you check if there's an issue? There's no issue, Ethan. I canceled everything. Silence. What did you say? Canceled what? Canceled. I'm not paying for you two anymore. You're kidding, right? Olivia was so embarrassed at the store. I'm not kidding, son. And about embarrassment. Trust me. I know exactly how that feels. I just went through it last Sunday. Embarrassed? What are you talking about, Mom? It was unbelievable he truly didn't understand. Ethan, you humiliated me in front of the whole family. You gave Margaret a $15,000 diamond ring and a luxury trip and gave me a $10 mug. You think I didn't notice? Mom, it's not like that. You're overreacting. No, Ethan. I'm finally reacting. And I hung up. 2 hours later, Ethan showed up at my door dragging Olivia behind him. Mary, what kind of crazy stunt is this? You canceled all our cards? Olivia shouted. They're not your cards, Olivia. They're my cards, the ones you two were using. But we need them. We have bills to pay. Then pay them with your own money. Ethan dropped onto the sofa, running his hands through his hair. Mom, you can't do this. We have financial commitments. Commitments you made based on my money, not your own hard work. That's not true, Olivia snapped. We both have jobs. Yes, you do, but you always spend more than you earn, and then rely on me to fill the gap. Ethan stepped closer, his voice weak. Mom, what do you want us to do? I want you two to live on your own money, take responsibility for your own lives, and treat me like a mother, not an ATM. That afternoon, they left my house, and I knew my life would never be the same again. For the first time in decades, I had no idea what lay ahead, but I felt like I was finally living my life, not someone else's. Friday morning, the battle reached a new level I had never imagined. At 7 a.m., the phone rang. It was Margaret, her voice filled with anger. She accused me of being cruel, selfish, and ungrateful, words I had already predicted, from a woman who had lived off my money without ever realizing it. But what struck me most was how she spoke about Ethan. He's your son. You have an obligation to help him. Obligation. That word echoed in my head. Margaret truly believed I was obligated to financially support a 44-year-old man just because he was my son. When I hung up, I felt both angry and relieved. Angry because I had finally seen Margaret's true face, the woman who had pretended to be a kind, understanding mother-in-law. Relieved because I realized I wasn't crazy people really had been taking advantage of me. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my younger sister Carol, who lived in another state. I needed to talk to someone who had known me since childhood, someone who could give me perspective. Carol, I have to tell you everything, I said, and I did, from the $9.99 mug to the decisions I had just made. Carol listened quietly, then said, Mary, I've been waiting for this call for years. Waiting? What do you mean? Waiting for the day you'd finally wake up and realize you were being used. I froze. You think I've been used? Not just me. The whole family thinks so. But no one dared to say anything because you always looked happy playing the hero, rescuing Ethan. Carol was right. I had confused being needed with being loved. That feeling of being indispensable had made me believe I mattered when in truth, I was just cleaning up the mess. Mary, Carol continued, you did the right thing. Ethan needs to learn how to be a real man, not a child living off his mother. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. With Carol's support, I felt stronger than ever. The next morning, I called a real estate office in Santa Barbara. I had only been there once, years ago, on a business trip, but I still remembered the peace I'd felt walking along the beach. I'd like to buy a house, I told the agent. A small one, with an ocean view. She seemed surprised by my urgency. 1 week later, I signed the papers for a 2-bedroom home with a balcony facing the Pacific. The price was equal to just 3 months of what I used to spend on Ethan. For the first time in my life, I bought something solely for myself, not for anyone else. Moving into that house brought a feeling of absolute freedom. I kept only what I truly needed, clothes I actually wore, things that held real meaning. I left behind decades of clutter and pretense, all the things I'd once bought to prove my worth or to fill my loneliness. I left behind decades of materialism and pretense, all the things I'd bought to prove my worth or to fill my loneliness. I only took 3 things of true sentimental value with me. My photo album from Ethan's childhood, my old Singer sewing machine, the faithful companion through the hardest years, and the $9.99 mug. Yes, that mug came with me. It became a symbol of freedom, a daily reminder that I had my own worth. In my first days in Santa Barbara, I felt a strange emptiness. Not sadness, not regret, but the feeling of someone who had been running all her life and had finally stopped to breathe. The phone barely rang. My schedule was completely blank. For the first time in decades, I didn't know what to do with my own time. And that's when I started rediscovering who I was. Beyond being a mother, beyond being a businesswoman, beyond the weight of being everyone's pillar, I started doing things I had long forgotten. Reading books just for pleasure. Walking along the beach without hurrying. Talking to strangers without expecting anything in return. That's how I met Linda, my 75-year-old neighbor, a widow who had moved to Santa Barbara after raising 4 grown children. You'll see, she told me on the very first day. Around here, people learn that life can be simple and still be happy. Linda became my first real friend in decades. Not a work acquaintance, not my son's friend's mother, but a genuine friend. Someone who saw me for who I was, not for what I could give. Each morning, as we shared coffee by the beach, I learned that Linda had once been through something just like me. I raised 4 kids on my own, she said. I worked as a housekeeper for over 30 years so they could have an education. When I retired, I thought they'd take care of me. But I found out they only called when they needed free babysitting or someone to cook for their parties. So what did you do? I asked. I did what you're doing now, I said no. I moved here and learned to find happiness in my own company. Our conversations made me realize I wasn't alone. There are thousands of women out there who gave everything to their families, only to look back one day and realize they'd become invisible in their own homes. It was around that time that I received the first call from Ethan since I'd moved away. It had taken him 2 months to find my new number. When he called, his voice sounded different, older, wearier, but also more genuine. Mom, are you okay? I've been worried. No one's been able to reach you. I'm fine, Ethan. Better than ever. Mom, about everything that happened, I want to say I'm sorry. Truly. It was the first time in years he'd apologized without expecting anything in return. No requests, no money, no persuasion. He simply admitted that he had treated me unfairly. I accept your apology, I said. But you need to understand I didn't do this to punish you. I did it to save us both. I know, Mom. I get it now. He told me the beginning had been hard. They had to sell the big house and move into a smaller apartment. Olivia had to go back to working full-time. They cut down expenses, canceled luxury plans, and completely changed their lifestyle. At first it was tough, Ethan said. Olivia cried a lot. So did I. But you know what, Mom? For the first time in years, I actually feel like a man. I'm solving my own problems. Hearing that, I felt a new kind of pride, not the pride of saving someone, but the pride of knowing my son had finally grown up. And what about Olivia? How is she handling it? At first, she was furious, Ethan said. She called you cruel, said you abandoned us. But a few months later, she began to understand. She said she's never felt so free and strong before. She discovered she likes working, that she enjoys the feeling of earning money with her own hands. She told me that before, she'd felt like a child, living off an allowance. Now she feels like a real woman. Those words moved me deeply. I realized my excessive generosity had unintentionally taken away both Ethan's and Olivia's chance to grow up. Mom, I want to come visit you. All right, but on one condition. You come here as my son, not as someone who needs saving. I promise. A week later, Ethan arrived in Santa Barbara. When I saw him step off the bus, I almost didn't recognize him. He looked thinner, tanned, dressed simply, no expensive clothes, no luxury car, but in his eyes, there was something I hadn't seen in years. Dignity. We spent 3 days together, 3 of the happiest days I'd had in decades. No talk about money, no problems, no past. We talked about life, about dreams, and the future he was building with his own 2 hands. Ethan told me he was now working as a consultant for a small company in Los Angeles. He was earning much less than before, but for the first time, he felt truly happy. Every dollar I make is my own money, he said. Not money someone gave me. Not money, borrowed money I earned myself. On the last evening before he left, we sat on the porch, watching the ocean. Mom, Ethan said, thank you for abandoning me. No, Ethan, I didn't abandon you. You forced me to let you grow up. I just helped you become a real man. No, Mom, he replied softly. You saved me from being a dependent child forever. Hearing that, I knew I'd made the hardest decision of my life, but also the most loving one. Because sometimes, love doesn't mean holding on, it means knowing when to let go. When Ethan returned to California, I was alone again, but no longer lonely. I felt whole. For the first time in decades, I had a healthy relationship with my son. A relationship where I was a mother, not a provider. A relationship where I was a person, not a tool. In the months that followed, Ethan called me often, not to ask for anything, but to share his life, check on me, and tell me his stories. He had become the son I'd always dreamed of. Independent, responsible, yet full of warmth. It was then that I realized I was ready to begin a new chapter. I had savings, time, and life experience. And I decided to start a project for women like me. Women who had spent their lives sacrificing for others and were now learning to live for themselves again. I rented a small room in downtown Santa Barbara and founded the Brave Mothers Club. It wasn't a company or a business venture. It was a support group for women who had lost themselves in motherhood and needed to rediscover who they really were. Every week, we met to talk, share our stories, and lift each other up with understanding. Women of all ages came, and though each had her own story, her own pain, we all shared one truth: that it's never too late to start over, whether at 60 or 70, that we can still find ourselves after decades of living for others. The one who touched me the most was Brenda, 72 years old, a mother who had raised 6 children on her own. "I used to think my worth came from how much I gave," she said. "But you taught me that my worth comes from who I am, not from what I do for others." Her words captured everything I had learned over those months. My value didn't lie in the money I spent, the problems I solved, or the sacrifices I made. It lay in me, Mary, a strong, intelligent woman, deserving to be seen, respected, and loved for who she is. Over time, my little house in Santa Barbara became a refuge not just for me, but for many women searching to reclaim their own worth. And I realized the true purpose of my life was never to be the perfect mother, but to become a whole woman happy with who I am. A year after that fateful Mother's Day, May came around again. But this time, I felt no worry, no pain. There was a peace in me that I had never known before. I was watering the plants on my porch when the phone rang. It was Ethan, his voice more cheerful than I'd heard in years. "Mom, can I come visit this weekend? I want to give you your Mother's Day gift in person." "A gift?" I asked, surprised. "Ethan, you don't have to get me anything. I know, but I want to." Just a small change in words, but it meant everything. This time, he wasn't giving out of guilt or obligation. He was giving out of gratitude. That Saturday afternoon, Ethan arrived with Olivia. They stepped out of an old, simple but clean car, and standing before me was a family that carried itself with dignity. Olivia hugged me and said with a warm, genuine smile, "Mary, you look beautiful. Life by the ocean really suits you." And she was right. I truly was different. More relaxed, tanner, lighter in spirit. I had lost weight, not from dieting, but because the worries that once weighed me down were gone. I slept better, laughed more, and at 68, I felt younger than I had at 60. I prepared a simple lunch: grilled fish, white rice, and a salad not fancy, but made with love. As we ate, I quietly observed them. There was a genuine harmony between them, not the pretend peace that money can buy to hide problems, but the calm of two people who had learned to live within their means. "Mom," Ethan said as we finished dessert, "we have some news. Olivia and we're having a baby." My heart swelled with joy. "Congratulations to both of you." Olivia looked at me, her eyes glistening. "Mary, I finally understand what you did. You didn't abandon us, you taught us to be independent." Her words brought tears to my eyes. Olivia, the woman who once measured worth by wealth, had finally discovered the value of independence. "And there's more," Ethan added. "We've started saving money. For the first time in our lives, we're actually putting something aside every month." "Saving for what?" I teased. "To buy a small house with our own money. No loans, no help." Their transformation filled me with pride, not the pride of someone who had carried others, but the joy of a mother watching her loved ones truly grow. That afternoon, Ethan invited me for a walk on the beach. "Mom," he said, stopping by the waves, "I want to apologize not just for what I said, but for how I treated you. You need to know you didn't raise an ungrateful son. Just one who took far too long to grow up, but finally understands your worth. Ethan, you don't need to apologize anymore. You've changed, and that's enough." "No, Mom, I have to say it. For years, I made you feel invisible in your own family." We sat down on a rock overlooking the sea. Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "Mom, this is my Mother's Day gift for you." Inside was a small silver pendant engraved with the words, "For the woman who taught me to be a man. With love and gratitude, Ethan." I held the pendant in my trembling hands, not because of its material value, but its emotional weight. It was the first gift Ethan had ever given me out of pure thoughtfulness, not guilt or obligation. "It's beautiful, Ethan," I said softly. "Mom," he replied, "I want you to know that everything I have today is because of you. Not just the money you once gave me, but the love you showed me. Not just because you fixed my problems, but because of the lessons you taught me." In that moment, as I looked out at the ocean and heard my son speak from his heart, I understood that my mission as a mother was complete. Not when I provided for him, not when I worried for him, but when he finally learned to stand on his own 2 feet. "Ethan," I smiled, "do you want to know something? That mug from years ago, it was the most important gift you ever gave me." "What do you mean?" "Because it woke me up. It made me realize I deserved more than that. It gave me the courage to change my life." Ethan chuckled softly. "So it finally served a purpose." "Oh, it did," I said. "It set me free." We walked back home as the sun began to set. That evening, we sat for hours, reminiscing about the beautiful moments of the past. For the first time in many years, I felt like I truly belonged to a family not as its financial supporter, but as a mother. On Sunday morning, before heading back to Los Angeles, Ethan handed me a letter. "Mom, I wrote this for you. Read it after we leave." After they drove away, I sat on the porch, holding the letter in my hands. It was handwritten, each line carefully crafted, as if every word carried its own weight. "Dear Mom, for 44 years, I believed you were born to serve me. I thought your job was to fix my mistakes, pay my debts, and rescue me from my failures. I never asked how you felt. I never wondered if you were happy. I never realized you had the right to live for yourself. You raised me so well that I became a man who thought he deserved everything without ever having to give anything back. Now I understand you weren't just my mother. You were my hero, my inspiration, the one who saved me. But more than that, you were the brave woman strong enough to force me to grow up, even when I was far too old to be coddled. Thank you for leaving me behind when I needed you most. Thank you for choosing to protect your dignity when I didn't yet know how to protect my own. Thank you for teaching me that true love sometimes means having the courage to say no. You are not just my mother. You are my life's greatest teacher. My example of courage. My symbol of dignity. I love you. Not for what you can give me, but for who you are. And who you are is extraordinary. Your son, the one who finally learned how to become a man, Ethan." I broke down in tears as I read it. Tears of relief, joy, and gratitude. Tears because my son had finally seen me not as a wallet, but as a person. Today, I have a life I never imagined I could have. A small, simple house, but it's mine. Real friends who love me for who I am, not for what I have. A job that makes me happy, helping other women rediscover themselves. And most importantly, a son who loves me sincerely, respects me, and chooses to have me in his life, not out of obligation, but out of love. The mug still sits in my kitchen. Every morning, I drink my coffee from it and watch the sun rise over the ocean. It reminds me that sometimes the cheapest gifts are the most priceless ones because they bring lessons no amount of money can buy. I've learned that I don't need anyone's permission to live my own life. I've learned that dignity matters more than convenience. I've learned that true love sometimes means saying no. And I've learned that it's never too late to start over, to find yourself again, and to choose happiness. Mary's story is a fictional tale inspired by real experiences. Names and places have been changed to protect privacy. But within her journey, many may see themselves. Mothers wives, women who gave everything and forgot to save a little love for themselves. Perhaps we've all faced that choice to stay silent for the sake of peace, or to speak up for the sake of dignity. There's no easy answer, only brave steps that lead us back to who we truly are. And then, like Mary, we learn that true love isn't unconditional sacrifice, but the courage to say, enough. May God bless every heart that loves, forgives, and is strong enough to begin again. Stay until the end to watch two of the most beloved stories you never know. One of them might touch your heart.